"Hey, mister," called out a voice. "Are you okay?" I squinted, trying to focus on the source of the sound. With effort, I managed to open my eyes. A man was standing over me, looking down with a concerned expression. I didn't recognize him. Why was he talking to me? "You must have banged your head pretty badly," he observed. "It's bleeding at the back. How did you end up here?" Sitting up was a painful struggle, but I finally managed it. I glanced around, taking in my surroundings, a jumble of rocks and debris. How did I get here? I tried to remember arriving, but my mind drew a blank. I couldn't even recall if I had a car. Reaching further back in my memory didn't help either. Everything was a haze. "Where am I?" I asked. "Right now, you're in Mike Robinson's stone yard," the man replied. "What state, what country are we in?" He looked at me quizzically. "That's a strange question. This is Pennsylvania. Don't you know what country?" "Yes, the United States," I exclaimed, feeling a rush of relief. At least I remembered something. I began to mentally inventory what I knew and what I didn't. I knew basic facts, states, colors, words, and clothing. I noticed the man beside me was unkempt and thin. Birds were singing in the nearby trees. But I didn't know how I ended up here. I didn't know my age. I didn't even know my name. Then it struck me, my identification would be in my wallet. I reached into my back pocket. It was empty. No wallet. I patted my dockers and found nothing. Glancing at my fingers, I saw no ring, but there was a faint, worn circle on my ring finger. Was I divorced? "Do you know me?" I asked the man. "Not really," he said. "Are you famous or something?" "I don't know. I can't remember anything about myself," I admitted, feeling a surge of worry. "Wow, it's like something out of a movie," the man said, wide-eyed. "Can you remember where you live?" "If I could do that, I'd remember something about myself," I responded, frustrated. "I have no money, no identification. What am I going to do?" "Mike's always looking for workers," the man suggested. "Why not get a job here and see if your memory comes back?" Despite his apparent lack of sharpness, his suggestion made sense. I needed money and a place to stay. Who knew what education or skills I had? "My name's Bob," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "James Martin," I replied as I shook his hand, the name slipping out effortlessly. Bob gave me a puzzled look and then glanced at a nearby bucket loader. A grin spread across his face. "I get it. That name's been used before, but heck, my dad was named Bob, same as me." "Pleased to meet you, James," he chuckled. "Good thing the Kubota was parked at the other end of the yard." "Do you think you could talk to your boss about giving me a job?" I asked. "I don't have a social security number or anything. He won't be able to run a background check on me." "Don't sweat it, James," Bob said reassuringly. "The boss isn't too keen on paying taxes anyway. He pays in cash at the end of each week, $10 for every pallet of stone you stack and wire. By the way, do you have any other clothes? Those pants won't last more than a couple of days." "Bob, what you see is all I have. I'll need to buy more once I earn some money," I replied. "Take me to your boss." The man smoking a cigar looked me up and down. "You woke up in my yard and want a job? How the hell did you get here, and where are you from?" Bob chuckled. "Mike, he can't remember anything about himself. Nothing at all. James needs a job until he figures things out. He might be stacking rocks for years before he remembers anything." Mike seemed to brighten at the thought, likely envisioning long-term cheap labor. Why did I remember what an indentured servant was but not my own name? "All right, James Martin, you'll get $8 for each pallet you stack and wire." "No way." "I start at 10, and once I get the hang of things, I'll expect more," I shot back. Mike glared at Bob. "How the hell did you know I pay?" "Bob, you have a big mouth." He turned back to me. "Fine. Help Bob with a couple of pallets for training, then start on your own. Bob, clean him up and show him the ropes." I soon realized the job wasn't complicated. Bob demonstrated how he stacked rocks on a pallet. He kept the outer edges straight and aligned with the pallet's sides. Once the pile reached about waist height, he took what looked like chicken wire nailed its bottom to the pallet, wrapped it tightly around the rocks, and then secured it by stapling it all the way around. He also used pieces of wire to tighten the overlapped sections, effectively keeping the pile stable while a forklift operator transported it. Men were constantly bringing various types of rocks into the stone yard. I was amazed by the variety of rocks and stones in Pennsylvania. My task was to stack fieldstone, mostly sourced from old stone walls that once separated properties, woods, meadows, and pastures. There was Pennsylvania bluestone, unique to this region and parts of nearby New York. It formed eons ago under ocean waters and came in layers of various thicknesses, starting from half an inch. Occasionally, loads of creek-washed stone were delivered, consisting of round, smooth rocks polished by centuries of flowing water. It took two of us over half an hour to complete a single pallet. At that rate, in an 8-hour day, I could potentially earn $160 if I worked as efficiently alone. Although I didn't remember my previous earnings, this seemed sufficient to live on. I embarked on my first solo pallet, only to be confronted by reality. It quickly became clear that my previous occupation didn't involve much physical labor. My back ached within the first hour, my stomach got in the way, and my fingers started to bleed. Bob noticed my struggle and brought me to the office again. I emerged with a special pair of gloves designed specifically for rock piling, which would cost me $20 for my first week's pay. I also found myself wondering what day of the week it was. I managed to finish 2 pallets that day. By the end, I was sore, my pants were torn, and my feet hurt, but at least I had earned enough to pay for the gloves I was using. A dozen men were busy piling rocks, and they had a good laugh at my expense. They even placed bets on how long I would last, making no effort to hide their skepticism. It didn't bother them that I knew they doubted my perseverance. What they failed to realize was that I had nowhere else to go. At the end of the day, Bob offered to let me stay at his place. He lived in a trailer a few miles from the stone yard, which I later learned was owned by Mike Robinson and rented to Bob. It brought to mind the old coal mines and their company towns. Bob's place was unexpectedly clean. Throughout the day, my opinion of him had shifted several times. His clothes were worn, and he wasn't polished, but he treated me kindly and worked hard, qualities rarer than one might think. Bob made us a couple of hamburgers, and that's when I realized I hadn't eaten in what felt like forever. I was ravenous. Honestly, those burgers were the best I'd ever had. Bob had the only bedroom, so he gave me a light blanket and directed me to the couch. He settled into a chair to watch TV. I was asleep before the first commercial break. Bob woke me up not long after. Startled, I wondered what was wrong. "James, it's after 5. You can't sleep all day. Get up and get ready for work. I'll make breakfast." Again, the meal was the best I could remember. I quickly washed the dirty dishes, sensing Bob's approval. I couldn't afford to wear out my only welcome. The second day was the hardest. I managed to stack 3 pallets and started on 4th, but my back was killing me. My stomach muscles ached and my head buzzed intermittently. By the time Bob drove me back to his place that night, I could barely move. We ate a simple dinner of macaroni and cheese, washed down with a beer. Carefully, I stretched out on the sofa. My back hurt so much, I doubted I'd ever fall asleep. "James, get up." "It's already past 5, Bob called out while preparing breakfast. I was sore all over, but at least I could move. I devoured my breakfast with the hunger of a wolf and promptly washed the dishes. My pants were in shreds. By noon, I had finished a pallet I started the previous day and completed 2 more. My back ached, but with continuous movement, it eased up. My legs, however, were in terrible shape. Bob led me back to the office. I emerged wearing a pair of chaps that buckled over my tattered dockers. "Why doesn't anyone else wear these, Bob?" I inquired. "Once you've been at this for a while, you don't wear out your jeans so quickly," Bob explained. "They're also pretty uncomfortable in the heat, but the main thing is that they cost 6 pallets worth of pay, James. I hated to see you burn through your earnings so fast, but you wouldn't have made it through the day otherwise. These will help you keep going." "Bob, I can't thank you enough. You've truly been a lifesaver," I said, gratitude evident in my voice. "Don't get all sentimental on me, James," Bob chuckled. "I have 2 weeks in the pool." The chaps made a significant difference. Although stiff and warm, they protected my legs. That day, I managed to finish 4 pallets and started another. It wasn't enough to fully cover the cost of the chaps, but it felt like progress. That night, I even watched a bit of TV before sleep overtook me. The next day was payday, and I completed 5 pallets by the time we wrapped up. After deducting the cost of gloves and chaps, I had $60 left. I felt fantastic. My back pain had lessened, and both my hands and legs were on the mend. Even the swelling on my head had subsided. "So, tomorrow's Saturday, Bob. What do you usually do on Saturdays?" I asked during our ride back to the trailer. "Well, I've been weighing my options, James. The ballet is too crowded, and my yacht's in the shop," Bob grinned. "I think I'll be piling rocks." I was accustomed to having Saturdays off in my previous job, so I was surprised to hear Bob plan to work. I asked him why. "James, we get paid based on what we accomplish. Some days, it's just too cold or snowy to be productive. Those of us who want to make it through winter tend to work extra hard during the good weather. That way, if we miss a few days, we still have enough money to get by," he explained. His reasoning was solid. I managed to convince Bob to take me to the local Walmart to buy a pair of steel toe work shoes, which cost me $45. I handed Bob the rest of my money. "What's this, James?" he asked. "It's for rent and gas, Bob. I should be giving you more, but this is all I have right now. Next week, I'll get a couple of pairs of jeans, so I won't be walking around in cut-off dockers and getting weird looks. I'll be able to give you more for rent and gas too," I assured him. Bob had found me lying in the stone yard on the morning of May 10th. By August 10th, I had surpassed everyone's expectations, and they all got their money back. I was at least 20 pounds lighter, deeply tanned, with long hair and a beard. Physically, I felt great, but my unease about my past hadn't faded. I needed to discover who I was and where I came from. Did I have any family? Children, a girlfriend, or maybe even a fiancé? I had worn a ring at some point. Was I divorced? Married and the ring stolen. The problem was, I had no idea how to start finding out. Now I was managing 10 pallets a day without breaking a sweat. I could cover my minor expenses, pay Bob some rent, and stash most of my earnings in a coffee can hidden in the woods. Without an identity, I didn't want to explain my situation to a bank. Over time, I befriended a few truckers who hauled rocks to New York and Long Island. They were independents, hired by a company from the city. Through conversation, I learned how much they earned per trip and where they delivered the stone. This got me thinking. The next chance I got, I bought a cheap cell phone and asked one of the truckers to bring some phone books from his delivery area. Between loading pallets, I made a few calls to contractors and builders in the metro area around New York City. One afternoon, one of the friendlier truckers pulled into the yard. I met him and we headed to see Mike Robinson. "Mike, I want to buy a truckload of palleted stone, and I'll pay cash," I told the surprised owner. He tried to overcharge me, but I knew what he was getting from the New York buyers, and it was a cash deal. We finally agreed on a price, and the truck was loaded. I had come to an arrangement with the driver. He would deliver the load to the address I provided, and the check would be made out to him. He would take his share and bring me the rest the next time he came for a delivery. I would make $45 profit per pallet, and the trucker would earn an extra 10% more than his usual rate. I realized he could pocket the money and deny any agreement we had. I also knew that if he were that type, my ability to judge character was seriously flawed. 4 days later, he rolled into the yard and handed me a wad of cash. That was the first of many loads of stone I marketed that summer and fall. Late September, everything changed. I was helping the trucker secure the load. Usually, he tossed the ends of the straps over the pallets of stone to me, and I'd ratchet them tight. After securing a strap, I stepped back and right into the path of a forklift carrying a load of stone. Luckily, it didn't run over my feet. Instead, it bounced me back into the trailer load of rock. My head cracked against the steel body of the trailer. I must have been knocked out for a few minutes. When I came to, several of the guys were gathered around me. Bob was on his knees next to me, splashing some water on my face. It took a few minutes, but I managed to stand and see the trucker off. That night, I had a splitting headache. I took more than the prescribed amount of extra-strength pain relievers, with little relief. Eventually, I drifted into a troubled, dream-filled sleep. The next day seemed endless. My head finally stopped throbbing around mid-afternoon, though it settled into a dull ache. Just then, a different trucker pulled into the yard. He was helping out a friend by hauling a load for him. I chatted with him while taking a break. After a few minutes, he seemed to stare at me. "Do you have a brother or some close relative in Binghamton?" he asked. "I hauled machinery for a company there a couple years ago, and the foreman looked like an older, heavier version of you." I was immediately intrigued by everything the man could tell me. He didn't remember the foreman's name, but the company was 4-Star Equipment. That sounded familiar. I got directions from him. It was Friday, payday. On the way home that evening, I told Bob about my plan to go to Binghamton the next day. I might have family there. The trucker said the guy could be my brother, Bob. "I have to find out," I explained. "Well, it's about a 2-hour drive from here, so we should arrive well before noon. We'll grab breakfast on the way." "I'm so tired of cooking," Bob grinned. The next morning, we hit the road. As we got closer, I began to recognize some landmarks. I could almost predict what we would see next as we went over a rise or rounded a corner. My head still ached, but not severely, though it made focusing difficult. By around 11, we pulled up in front of 4-Star Equipment. Tears trickled down my cheeks. Everything felt so familiar. Had I worked here with my brother or another relative? It felt like I was possibly coming home. "Well, let's go inside and see if you can collect some workman's comp," Bob joked. I didn't need to look around for the office. I knew exactly where it was. Bob followed me as we walked inside and approached the counter. A young man in his 30s was talking on the phone. He gestured that he would be with us shortly. His face didn't spark any memories for me. Then Bob nudged me in the ribs. When I turned to see what was bothering him, he pointed to a picture on the wall. I stared at it for a few minutes, but it didn't ring any bells. Beneath it was a small nameplate. I moved closer to read it. Kevin Harris, President 4-Star Equipment, 1962 to 2006. "I don't recognize him, Bob," I confessed. "What's the big deal?" "That guy could be your brother," Bob hissed. "He has the same nose and eyes as you. He's probably the guy that trucker thought could be your older brother." I looked closer. He looked like a typical executive, soft and pompous. Add the fact that he was dead, and I found it hard to muster much interest. I had hoped to find someone alive who might know me. Then I saw her. About 10 feet behind the counter were several offices with glass fronts. An attractive woman, dressed in black, was sitting at one of the desks, and I just knew that I knew her. She looked so familiar. Then she glanced up from her paperwork and looked at me briefly before returning to her work. There was no sign of recognition from her. I watched her for a few minutes, actually fixated on her. Her face, her smile, even the way she rubbed her ear all seemed so familiar. But the more I tried to concentrate, the worse my headache got. "Bob, let's get a room at a local hotel now. I'm getting a killer headache." She didn't recognize me, and neither does this jerk who's still on the phone when he should be helping us, I said, nodding towards the man still on the call. By the time we found a motel, my head felt like it was about to explode. I kept popping Tylenol like candy until Bob took the bottle away from me. "Get some sleep, James. You'll feel better when you wake up." I lay down, skeptical that I'd managed to sleep, but somehow I drifted off. My dreams were vivid and unsettling. In the first one, a man brandished a gun at me, and I was paralyzed with fear. The terror he instilled was overwhelming. I woke up drenched in sweat, only to slip back into another dream. This time, I saw the woman from the equipment company with a man. He pulled her into his arms, making her laugh, then kissed her. She spotted me watching and immediately looked concerned, while the man just laughed and pointed at me. I turned and fled. I jolted awake, soaked in sweat. My head still throbbed, though not as badly. The image of the man with the gun lingered, haunting me, unless I focused on the woman. Her expression of sadness, or maybe pity, erased the vision of the armed man. Fragments of my past kept flitting through my mind. Suddenly, I realized those fragments were memories. Brief flashes of my history surged through my thoughts. I sat up, cradling my head in my hands, and let the memories come. "Well, you don't look like you overdosed, at least," Bob said as he entered the room, carrying a pizza and a six-pack. "Feeling any better?" "My headache's almost gone," I replied, "but I feel a bit sick because my memory's starting to come back." "While you were napping, I went back to that 4-star place and asked some questions," Bob said. "You know the woman you were staring at?" "Yeah, I remember. That's Sandra Harris," I answered. "Well, damn. Why do I bother trying to help you?" Bob grumbled. "Then you know she's the widow of Kevin Harris, the guy who started that company." "No, Bob, I didn't know she was a widow. How did her husband die?" I asked, curious. "He was in a high-speed chase with the police on I-81 near Harrisburg. He cut off a propane truck, they collided, and hit an underpass at around 80 miles an hour. The truck exploded, and the fire melted the overpass. Both the truck driver and Sandra's husband were incinerated. They identified him by a piece of the car's rear end blown away by the explosion." "Ever heard of identifying people with dental records?" Bob asked. "This time, they used the license plate. They'd probably buried him in a matchbox. That all happened on May 10th. It hit me then. That was the day Bob found me lying in the stone yard. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and just like that, my headache was gone. I faced a critical decision on how to move forward. Knowing there were likely numerous legal issues to sort out, I decided to consult a lawyer. It was just past 4 in the afternoon when I arrived and rang the doorbell. "Can I help you?" asked the man who answered. "I hope so," I replied. "I've been told you're the best, or worst, shyster in the state." "Why isn't that funny to me, a shoal?" he snapped, clearly irritated. "Get off my property." "Easy there, Jason," I chuckled. "Don't make me kick your ass today, especially since I could never manage it back in school." "Wait, who are you?" "I know you, don't I? The hair and beard make it hard to tell, but you look like Kevin Harris," he exclaimed. "Got a few minutes for an old, supposedly dead friend, Jason?" I asked. He stared at me, his jaw trembling and his hands shaky. It seemed a miracle his heart held up. "Good God. Get in here and tell me what the hell happened, and why you're not dead," Jason demanded. I signaled for Bob to join us, and we went inside. We spent 3 hours there, eventually swearing Jason and his wife Anne to secrecy before we left. Anne insisted I should call Sandra, but I refused. At precisely 5 minutes past 10 on Monday morning, Jason and I walked into 4-star equipment. Over the weekend, I had gotten a haircut, shaved, and donned a suit and tie. We entered through the service area, where workers were busy with various pieces of heavy equipment. Amid the clattering wrenches and curses, I kept moving. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to the conference room. The response to my appearance was one of utter disbelief. Gasps and shrieks filled the room. Sandra sat at the head of the table. Her reaction was extreme. Her eyes bulged, her mouth fell open, and she turned ghostly pale before fainting in her chair. My 18-year-old son whipped his head around so fast I feared he might hurt himself. My secretary stumbled over my name in shock. And then there was Ryan Thompson. He was visibly surprised, though he managed to maintain his characteristic sneer, masking any overt signs of shock or concern. I paid no attention to the couple of suits seated at the table. I took a moment to survey the room. Sandra approached, still pale but gradually regaining her color. "Sorry I'm late," I understated. "Ran into some unexpected problems. But I'm here now, so let's make this quick. The business is not for sale, and even if it were, it would never be sold to Ryan Thompson. Any questions?" "This is bullshit," my beloved son erupted. "You disappear for months, and now you come here to dictate terms. Mom and I are selling this place." "That's my son," I said, shaking my head. "Gary, you are sorely mistaken. You have no say in this. You've been an embarrassment for years. Look at the mess in your ears and lip. Look at your baggy pants and that ridiculous hair. You are worthless. Get out." "Like hell," Gary growled. "I have an interest in this place. It's a family business, and I'm the only son, the only child. I don't know if I should be thankful we only had one kid or wish we had more, hoping they'd turn out better." I retorted, "Get out of here." "I'm not going anywhere, old man," he challenged. Gary, standing about 6 feet tall and nearly 200 pounds, was my only child. I stepped over, grabbed a handful of his purple hair, and yanked him from his chair. Jason kindly opened the door as I briskly dragged Gary, who cursed continuously. He managed to get to his feet enough to land a smack on the side of my face. He looked shocked when I turned and smiled at him. I swiftly dropped him with a shot to the chin. Grabbing his hair again, I resumed dragging him. He managed to get his feet under himself just enough to prevent me from tearing his hair out. The guys had stopped working and gathered by the door to watch. I left Gary outside the door. "If and when you learn to dress properly, clean that mess off your face, get a haircut, and apologize to your mother and me, I'll consider hiring you as a mechanic at starting pay. Until then, stay off the property and out of my house," I yelled. Turning back, I saw my team and the group from the conference room watching. My service techs were grinning ear to ear. I walked past them, heading back to the conference room. "Welcome back, boss," one of the guys shouted as I re-entered the room, where everyone had already reclaimed their seats. "I think I addressed Gary's concerns," I said quietly, scanning the room. "Are there any more questions?" One of the slick-looking guys in a suit stood up. "My client has a signed sales agreement," he said. "He insists it be honored, or he'll take you to court to gain possession." "You goddamn shister," I snapped. "Do you honestly think you'll convince a judge that I'm dead? Do you think that contract will hold up in court? Go ahead and waste your client's money. Come on." I turned to Ryan Thompson, my so-called buyer. "Ryan, it's taking everything in me not to kick your miserable ass," I spat out. "Get the hell out and take these vultures with you, or let's settle this now. Your choice. I'm pretty damn pissed." Ryan and his entourage didn't need to be told twice. They quickly stood and fled the room, leaving my secretary, Sandra, Jason, and me behind. Jason, ever the deadpan, commented, "Well, Kevin, it's good you brought me along to handle everything diplomatically and legally. Let me know if you need me. I'll be at my office downtown." "Boss Kevin, I'll be back in my office if you need me for anything," Ryan whispered through her sobs as she left. Now it was just Sandra and me. We locked eyes for over a minute. She was stunning in her conservative black suit, her hair pulled back. I had forgotten the effect she had on me, but standing there, the memory came rushing back. "Sandra, that evening I saw you with Ryan, I went out to get drunk. On my way, a thug carjacked me at gunpoint at the liquor store I began. He forced me to drive for a couple of hours until we ended up at a stone yard somewhere in Pennsylvania. He tried to shove me into the trunk, but I refused. I've heard too many stories about people never getting out of trunks once they're put in. I decided to make a run for it," I continued. "He shot me in the head, and I collapsed instantly. He must have thought I was dead because when I came to the next morning, he had taken my wallet, money, and wedding ring. Worse, he had taken my memory, Sandra. I had a dent on the top of my head and a splitting headache with no clue who I was." Sandra's breathing grew heavy, and her hands clutched her dress tightly. Tears streamed down her face, and I could see this was overwhelming for her. "Then, the other day, pieces started falling into place, and I managed to find my way back here," I continued. "I met Jason on Friday evening, and he filled me in on everything that had been happening while I was gone. He told me how Gary had become uncontrollable. Although he had been problematic for years, I wasn't ready to face it. Jason explained how Gary refused to return to college after thinking I had died, how he'd begun to bully you, and how he insisted on selling the business to get the money. Sandra, I realize my actions today may have seemed violent or cruel, but we've coddled Gary for too long, turning him into a lazy, petulant person. I love him as my son, but I can't stand to have him around when he disgusts me. I dislike him as a person. He needs to build his own business and make his own way. I won't let him hold us, the people who care about him, hostage any longer, I concluded. Kevin, I don't know where to start. I thought you had died after I pushed you away. Then Gary just got worse and worse, but I was afraid of losing him too. He was all I had left, so I gave in to his demands. It was a mistake, but I wasn't thinking clearly. The business started declining without you, and out of desperation, I agreed to sell it to Ryan, Sandra explained. I know you probably despise me, but I have to confess, I only ever kissed Ryan that night and no more. He was charming, and I let him kiss me. He made me laugh, but I felt guilty the moment it happened. Then I saw you. I thought it would be the last time, Kevin, Sandra said through her tears. Jason and Anne told me everything. They said you felt horrible and guilty when you thought I had died. They mentioned you've been wearing black every day since, I replied. It was my form of penance. I've never dated or been involved with any other men. You can ask anyone. They all know it's true, Kevin, she sobbed. Sandra, I spent months feeling utterly alone, and it was torment. I discovered so much about myself. When my memory began to return, I learned even more. You're an incredibly beautiful woman and the love of my life. I don't want to live without you. But if you can't get past how I treated Gary or how I left you alone, tell me and I'll go, I promised. Kevin, she cried even harder, wrapping her arms around me. After several minutes of sobbing into my chest, she finally spoke up. I was so proud of how you dealt with Gary. I realized I didn't like him much either. Now he must grow up or continue to fail. That's his burden. How much weight have you lost, Kevin? Sandra asked suddenly as she tried to feel for my love handles. My God, you've become a hunk. Does that mean your stamina is better too? The business world might disapprove of many things I did in the office over the next hour, but it's my business, my wife, and my conference table. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.